Manifestation practices promise that focused intention can reshape reality. The claim sounds mystical, but the experience of it working feels undeniably real to millions of people. What's happening isn't magic, and it isn't purely delusion either. It's confirmation bias, one of the most robust and well-documented patterns in cognitive psychology. Confirmation bias describes the brain's systematic tendency to favor information that supports what you already believe, while downplaying or ignoring information that contradicts it. This isn't a flaw in reasoning that only affects certain people. It's a fundamental feature of how human cognition operates, present in virtually everyone, measurable in laboratory settings, and persistent even when people are explicitly warned about it. The term was formalized by psychologist Peter Wason in the 1960s, though the phenomenon itself had been observed for much longer. Wason designed elegant experiments demonstrating that people don't naturally test their hypotheses by looking for disconfirming evidence. Instead, they look for confirmation. When asked to determine a rule governing a number sequence, participants overwhelmingly generated examples they expected to fit the rule rather than examples designed to break it. They declared success prematurely, convinced by a handful of compatible cases, blind to the possibility that many other rules could produce the same results. This bias operates at multiple stages of information processing. It influences what you pay attention to in the first place. It affects how you interpret ambiguous information. It shapes what you remember later. And it determines how you weigh evidence when drawing conclusions. Imagine you've decided to manifest a new job. You write affirmations, visualize success, and declare your intention to the universe. Then, 3 weeks later, a former colleague messages you about an opening at her company. You get the interview. You get the job. The manifestation worked. Except it didn't. Not in the sense that your thoughts bent reality. What happened is that your belief in manifestation made you notice this particular outcome and link it causally to your practice, while countless alternative explanations and contradictory evidence faded into irrelevance. The colleague may have been planning to reach out anyway. You may have been passively on her mind because of a recent LinkedIn update, or because her company was expanding and she thought of former coworkers. You may have applied to a dozen other jobs that didn't respond. You may have been ignored by opportunities you never saw. But those details don't register as evidence against manifestation. They're just background noise. The one success, however, becomes a vivid, meaningful data point because it aligns with your expectation. Selective attention is the gatekeeper. Your conscious mind can only process a fraction of the sensory information available at any given moment. The environment is overwhelmingly complex. Too many sights, sounds, conversations, emails, fleeting thoughts, and potential connections exist simultaneously for all of them to reach awareness. So the brain filters. It prioritizes information tagged as relevant based on goals, fears, recent experiences, and active beliefs. When you commit to manifesting something, you're essentially telling your attentional system that this topic is now highly relevant. Suddenly, information related to that goal gets flagged. Opportunities you might have scrolled past now catch your eye. Conversations you might have ignored become significant. A podcast episode about career transitions, a flyer for a networking event, an offhand comment from a friend about hiring trends. All of these register as meaningful because they relate to the goal you've activated. This isn't supernatural. It's the same mechanism that makes you notice a particular car model everywhere after you've decided to buy one. The cars were always there. The frequency didn't change. Your attentional filter changed. But confirmation bias doesn't stop at noticing. It also governs interpretation. Ambiguous events get read in ways that support the belief. If something vaguely positive happens, it's evidence that manifestation is working. If nothing happens, you're being patient and trusting the process. If something negative happens, it's a test, or a redirection, or a sign you need to adjust your vibration. The framework is flexible enough to absorb almost any outcome without being falsified. Psychologists call this belief perseverance. Once a belief is established, people become remarkably creative at protecting it from disconfirmation. They reinterpret evidence, shift goalposts, and generate auxiliary hypotheses that explain away inconsistencies. This isn't conscious dishonesty. It's automatic. The brain genuinely doesn't process contradictory evidence with the same weight it assigns to supportive evidence. Studies on political beliefs, medical decisions, and consumer behavior all reveal the same pattern. People exposed to balanced information about a topic don't update their views in balanced ways. They extract more support for their existing stance from ambiguous data than an objective observer would. Two people with opposing beliefs can read the same article and both walk away more convinced they were right. They're not lying about what they read. They're selectively encoding and retrieving the parts that fit. Memory adds another layer. What you remember about an experience is not an objective recording. It's a reconstruction influenced by current beliefs and emotions. When you recall the events leading up to a successful outcome, your brain highlights the steps that seem causally connected to your manifestation practice and diminishes details that suggest randomness or alternative explanations. This reconstructive process happens every time you retrieve a memory. Each retrieval subtly alters the memory, making it more coherent, more aligned with your current narrative. Over time, the story of how manifestation worked becomes cleaner, more compelling, more obvious. You forget the doubts you had, the times you didn't follow through, the luck involved, the conventional effort you expended. What remains is a streamlined narrative in which intention clearly preceded outcome. The feeling of manifestation working is also reinforced by the sheer base rate of events. Life is full of coincidences. In any given month, dozens of small positive things happen. A friend reaches out. A sale appears on something you wanted. You find a parking spot quickly. You hear a song you were thinking about. Most of these events are statistically unremarkable. The world is large and interconnected. Overlaps occur constantly. But when you're primed to see manifestation at work, these ordinary coincidences become extraordinary. You don't calculate the prior probability. You don't consider how many times similar things happened before you started manifesting, or how many things you manifested that didn't happen. You experience the one striking match between intention and outcome, and it feels significant. Humans are not naturally good intuitive statisticians. We don't instinctively account for base rates, sample sizes, or regression to the mean. We're wired to detect patterns, even when patterns don't exist. This was adaptive in an environment where missing a real pattern, a predator's movement, a seasonal change, could be fatal. Better to see patterns that aren't there than to miss ones that are. But in the modern context, this bias means we're constantly finding meaning in noise. Manifestation practices exploit this vulnerability beautifully. They encourage you to set clear intentions, which activates your attentional and motivational systems. They promote positive thinking, which feels good, and reduces anxiety, making you more socially confident and persistent. They create rituals that impose structure and reduce decision fatigue. And then, when something good happens, as it inevitably will in the normal course of events, the practice gets the credit. The person manifesting isn't lying about their experience. They genuinely feel that their thoughts influenced reality. But what's actually happening is that their thoughts influence their attention, their behavior, their memory, and their interpretation of events. Those effects are real. They can be powerful, but they operate through entirely mundane psychological channels, not through any mechanism that violates the known laws of physics. Confirmation bias doesn't make manifestation worthless. If a practice makes you feel more hopeful, more focused, and more proactive, those are genuine benefits. But understanding the mechanism matters. It changes what you should expect. It changes how you respond to failure. It changes whether you credit your effort or wait passively for the universe to deliver. The feeling of manifestation working is real. The explanation for why it feels that way is just more interesting and more useful than magic. The brain receives approximately 11 million bits of sensory information every second. Your conscious mind can process around 40 of them. This staggering disparity means that almost everything happening around you at any given moment goes unnoticed. What determines which 40 bits break through isn't random. It's managed by a network of neural structures collectively known as the reticular activating system. And understanding how this system works reveals why manifestation practices feel so effective. The reticular activating system, or RAS, sits at the base of the brain where the spinal cord meets the brainstem. It's a diffuse network of neurons that acts as a gatekeeper for incoming information. It filters sensory data before it reaches higher cortical areas responsible for conscious thought. The RAS doesn't evaluate meaning or truth. It evaluates relevance. And relevance is determined by what your brain currently considers important. This filtering happens automatically, beneath conscious awareness. You're not deciding what to notice. The decision has already been made by the time information reaches consciousness. The RAS operates on learned priorities, immediate goals, emotional salience, and survival-related cues. Loud noises, sudden movements, your name, anything threatening. These break through the filter easily because they've been tagged as high priority by evolution or experience. But the RAS is also highly trainable. When you repeatedly focus attention on a particular type of information, you're essentially programming the filter. You're telling the system that this category of input matters. Over time, the RAS begins flagging related information automatically, bringing it into conscious awareness even when you're not actively searching for it. This is why manifestation practices often include repetitive elements. Daily affirmations, vision boards, journaling about goals. These aren't just motivational exercises. They're training protocols for your attentional filter. Each repetition reinforces the signal that this goal, this outcome, this type of opportunity is now relevant. The RAS adjusts accordingly. It starts highlighting information connected to the goal. Suddenly, you notice a book on a topic related to your intention. You overhear a conversation that seems perfectly timed. You see an advertisement for something you were just thinking about. These aren't manifestations of psychic influence. They're manifestations of updated filtering priorities. The information was always there. Your RAS is now letting it through. This phenomenon has been studied extensively under the concept of priming. Priming occurs when exposure to one stimulus influences your response to a subsequent stimulus, often without conscious awareness of the connection. Show someone words related to old age, like Florida, bingo, and wrinkle, and they subsequently walk more slowly down a hallway. Flash images of money, and people become less helpful and more self-focused in unrelated tasks. Present words associated with achievement, and performance on problem-solving tasks improves. These effects are subtle and sometimes difficult to replicate in certain contexts, which has led to ongoing debates about their magnitude. But the basic principle holds. Recent activation of a concept makes related concepts more accessible. It lowers the threshold for related information to enter awareness and influence behavior. When you engage in manifestation rituals, you're priming yourself. You're activating networks of associated concepts. If you spend 15 minutes each morning visualizing career success, your brain doesn't compartmentalize that activity. The activation spreads. Related concepts like professional networking, skill development, confidence, leadership become more accessible throughout the day. You're more likely to notice opportunities aligned with those concepts because the neural pathways are already warmed up. This creates a feedback loop. Noticing more opportunities increases engagement with the goal. Increased engagement strengthens the priming effect. Stronger priming makes you notice even more. The subjective experience is that the universe is conspiring to help you. The objective reality is that your brain has been reprogrammed to prioritize a specific category of information. The car example mentioned earlier illustrates this perfectly, but it's worth examining more closely because it demonstrates the mechanism so cleanly. Imagine you've decided to buy a blue sedan. Within days, blue sedans seem to be everywhere. Parking lots, highways, your own street, they appear with improbable frequency. But the actual number of blue sedans hasn't changed. What changed is that blue sedans now match an active search template in your RAS. They've been promoted from irrelevant background details to flagged stimuli. This same process applies to anything you focus on. Decide you want to travel more, and you start noticing travel deals, hearing friends' vacation stories, seeing inspiring destination photos. Decide you want a relationship, and you become more aware of couples, dating apps, social events. Decide you want financial abundance, and you notice investment advice, side hustle opportunities, news about entrepreneurship. The RAS doesn't distinguish between goals you're manifesting and goals you're simply pursuing through conventional effort. It responds to focused attention, regardless of the metaphysical framework attached to that attention. But manifestation practices are particularly good at generating sustained, emotionally charged focus, which is exactly what the RAS responds to most strongly. Emotion amplifies the filtering effect. The amygdala, a key structure in emotional processing, has direct connections to the RAS. Emotionally significant information gets priority access to conscious awareness. This is why traumatic memories are so vivid, why you remember exactly where you were during major life events, why a song connected to a past relationship can stop you in your tracks. Manifestation practices often incorporate emotional amplification deliberately. You're not just writing down a goal. You're visualizing how achieving it will feel. You're generating gratitude as if it's already happened. You're creating emotional associations with the outcome. This charges the goal with affective weight, ensuring the RAS treats related information as high priority. From a neurological standpoint, the boundary between thinking about something intensely and preparing to act on it is thin. The same motor cortex regions that activate during physical movement show activity during vivid mental imagery of that movement. The same reward circuitry that fires when you achieve a goal fires when you vividly imagine achieving it. Your brain treats imagined experiences as rehearsals, not fantasies. It begins preparing the body and mind for the anticipated reality. This preparation isn't metaphysical, it's practical. If your brain believes you're about to need certain skills, information, or responses, it starts making those resources more accessible. It's optimizing for a predicted future. When you manifest a goal, you're essentially feeding your brain a prediction about what's coming. And the brain responds by tuning its filters to support that prediction. The RAS also interacts with another critical system, the salience network, which determines what gets tagged as important in real time. The salience network monitors both external stimuli and internal states, constantly updating priorities. When you're hungry, food-related cues become more salient. When you're anxious, threat-related cues dominate. When you're focused on a goal, goal-relevant cues rise to the top. Manifestation practices essentially hijack the salience network. By consistently directing attention toward a desired outcome, you're training the network to treat that outcome and anything related to it as highly salient. This isn't deception, it's strategic reprogramming of an already plastic system. The plasticity is key. The RAS and associated filtering mechanisms aren't fixed. They adapt continuously based on experience, goals, and environmental demands. This adaptability is what allows humans to function in wildly different contexts, to learn new skills, to shift priorities. It's also what makes manifestation feel so responsive. You set an intention, and within days, sometimes hours, your perceptual world seems to shift. Relevant information starts appearing. But here's the edge. The RAS can't create opportunities that don't exist. It can only reveal opportunities that were already present but filtered out. If you live in a context where opportunities for a particular goal genuinely don't exist, no amount of manifestation will conjure them. The system makes you a better noticer, not a reality bender. This distinction matters because it explains why manifestation seems to work better for some goals and some people than others. If you're embedded in an environment rich with latent opportunities, activating your RAS to notice them can feel like magic. If opportunities are genuinely scarce, manifestation practices might increase hope and motivation, but they won't manufacture outcomes from nothing. What manifestation practices do extremely well is solve a specific problem: attention allocation in a world of overwhelming information. They give your brain clear instructions about what to prioritize. They do this through repetition, emotion, and ritual, all of which are highly effective training methods for the RAS. The results feel magical because the shifts in perception happen automatically and often immediately. But the mechanism is entirely biological, well understood, and consistently reproducible. Setting a goal changes behavior. This is not controversial. What's interesting is how much it changes behavior, how automatically, and how often people remain unaware of the specific actions that flow from articulated intentions. Manifestation practices feel effective partly because they trigger goal-directed behavior without the person experiencing it as effort. They think they're just visualizing. In reality, they're activating complex psychological machinery that governs motivation and action. Goal-setting theory, developed primarily by psychologist Edwin Locke beginning in the late 1960s, demonstrates that specific and challenging goals lead to higher performance than vague or easy goals. The mechanism isn't mysterious. Clear goals direct attention, mobilize effort, increase persistence, and motivate strategy development. When you know what you're aiming for, your cognitive and behavioral systems align around that target. But goals don't just sit passively in your mind waiting for deliberate action. They exert continuous influence on decision-making, often below conscious awareness. You choose differently when a goal is active. You interpret situations differently. You allocate time differently. You take small actions that seem unrelated but incrementally move you toward the outcome. Manifestation practices are exceptionally good at making goals psychologically active. Writing affirmations, creating vision boards, visualizing desired outcomes. These activities don't just clarify what you want, they activate the goal in working memory, which is the mental workspace where information is held and manipulated during cognitive tasks. Once a goal is active in working memory, it starts competing for resources and influencing ongoing behavior. This happens through a process psychologists call implementation intentions. An implementation intention is a specific plan that links a situational cue to a goal-directed response. The format is simple. When situation X arises, I will perform behavior Y. Research by Peter Gollwitzer and colleagues has repeatedly shown that forming implementation intentions dramatically increases the likelihood of goal achievement compared to simply having a goal intention. The power of implementation intentions lies in automaticity. When you pre-commit to a specific action in a specific context, you essentially delegate the decision to initiate that action to environmental cues. You don't need to rely on willpower or conscious deliberation in the moment. The situation itself triggers the behavior. Manifestation practices often generate implementation intentions without explicitly labeling them as such. When you visualize getting a promotion, you're not just imagining the outcome. You're mentally simulating the steps that lead there. You see yourself speaking up in meetings, taking on visible projects, networking strategically. These simulations function as rehearsals. They create mental associations between situations and actions. Later, when the actual situation arises, the rehearsed response comes more readily to mind. This effect is amplified by something called the Zeigarnik effect, named after psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, who observed it in the 1920s. The Zeigarnik effect describes the brain's tendency to maintain heightened accessibility for uncompleted tasks compared to completed ones. An active goal, particularly one you've invested emotional energy into, creates a kind of cognitive tension. Your mind keeps returning to it. You notice information relevant to it. You experience intrusive thoughts about it. This isn't distraction. It's the goal. Maintaining activation. Ensuring you remain oriented toward its completion. When you manifest a goal, you're essentially installing an uncompleted task in your cognitive system. The brain registers it as something unfinished, something requiring resolution. This creates persistent background activation. Even when you're not consciously thinking about the goal, it's exerting subtle influence on attention and behavior. The behavioral changes that result are often small and easily overlooked. You respond to an email a little faster. You accept an invitation you might have declined. You mention your interest to a friend in passing. You spend 15 minutes researching something you'd normally ignore. None of these actions feels like progress. Each one is trivial in isolation. But goals work through accumulation. Many small actions compound into significant movement. Manifestation enthusiasts sometimes describe this as the universe providing signs or opportunities. What's actually happening is behavioral activation. You're doing more, noticing more, engaging more. The increased activity rate naturally increases the rate at which favorable outcomes occur. It's not that the universe changed. You changed. Your action portfolio shifted. This distinction becomes clearer when examining cases where manifestation doesn't seem to work. Typically, these are situations where the person is visualizing and affirming, but not taking any concrete actions, even unconsciously. They're waiting passively for external change. This violates the fundamental mechanism. Goals influence outcomes through behavior change. If behavior doesn't change, outcomes won't either, regardless of how much intention you broadcast. Mental contrasting, a technique developed by researcher Gabriele Oettingen, offers a more structured approach to the same underlying process. Mental contrasting involves first imagining the desired outcome vividly, then deliberately considering the obstacle standing in the way. This creates a tension between desired future and present reality, which mobilizes problem-solving and action. Studies show that mental contrasting increases goal commitment and effort more effectively than purely positive visualization alone. The reason appears to be that acknowledging obstacles triggers planning. You start generating strategies to overcome the barriers. You become more realistic about what's required. You shift from passive fantasy to active engagement. Many manifestation practices inadvertently incorporate this by focusing intensely on the goal, which naturally brings obstacles to mind, even if the framework discourages dwelling on negativity. The practitioner may consciously be affirming success, but unconsciously they're processing what needs to change, what skills need development, what conversations need to happen. Another relevant concept is approach versus avoidance motivation. Approach goals focus on achieving positive outcomes. Avoidance goals focus on preventing negative outcomes. Research consistently shows that approach goals are associated with greater well-being, persistence, and performance. Manifestation practices are structurally approach-oriented. You're visualizing what you want, not what you're trying to escape. This framing naturally leads to more proactive behavior and more positive emotional states. The emotional component can't be overstated. Goals pursued with enthusiasm and optimism generate more effort than goals pursued with anxiety or obligation. Manifestation practices make goal pursuit feel good. They wrap the process in positive emotion, which sustains motivation over time. This isn't trivial. Most goals fail not because they're impossible, but because people lose motivation before completion. There's also evidence that self-efficacy, your belief in your ability to succeed, directly predicts effort and persistence. Manifestation practices, by their nature, assume success is possible and likely. This assumption, whether justified or not, increases self-efficacy, and increased self-efficacy increases behavioral follow-through. This creates an interesting loop. You start manifesting because you believe it works. That belief increases your confidence in the goal. Increased confidence leads to more action and persistence. More action and persistence increase the probability of success. Success reinforces your belief in manifestation. The cycle sustains itself, not because manifestation has metaphysical power, but because confidence and behavior are tightly linked. It's worth noting that all of this can happen without conscious awareness. You don't need to notice that you're taking more action, being more persistent, or approaching situations differently. The changes can be subtle enough that they simply feel like normal behavior. From your subjective perspective, you're just visualizing and trusting the process. The actual work happens in the background, mediated by psychological systems you're not directly monitoring. This lack of awareness is part of why manifestation feels magical. If you were consciously strategizing, planning, and executing actions, you'd attribute the outcome to your effort. But when the actions feel spontaneous, when opportunities seem to appear without seeking, when progress happens without struggle, it's easy to credit something external. You don't see the behavioral machinery operating. You only see the result. The reality is that articulating a goal and focusing on it repeatedly does more than clarify desire. It activates motivational systems, primes action-relevant concepts, generates implementation intentions, and sustains cognitive engagement through goal-related tension. All of this translates into behavior change, often subtle, frequently unconscious, but cumulatively significant. Manifestation works, not by altering external reality, but by systematically altering your behavior in ways that increase the probability of your desired outcome. The mechanism is entirely psychological, entirely explainable, and entirely powerful. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures with a strong bias towards seeing intention and agency where none exists. This tendency, deeply embedded in cognitive architecture, makes manifestation practices feel far more powerful than they are. The brain doesn't neutrally assess whether an outcome resulted from your intentions or from chance. It actively constructs narratives of control and causality, even when events are demonstrably random. This phenomenon has been studied extensively under the umbrella of illusory control, a term introduced by psychologist Ellen Langer in the 1970s. Langer demonstrated that people behave as though they have control over outcomes that are purely determined by chance. In one classic study, participants were willing to pay more for lottery, tickets they had chosen themselves compared to tickets assigned randomly, despite the objective odds being identical. The act of choosing created a subjective sense of influence. The illusion extends far beyond gambling. People throw dice harder when they need high numbers. They concentrate intensely during coin flips, as if focus could alter the result. They believe they can influence traffic lights, weather patterns, or the outcome of sports games they're watching from home. These beliefs aren't held with absolute conviction, but they're present enough to shape behavior and emotional experience. Manifestation practices tap directly into this bias. When you declare an intention and something related subsequently occurs, your brain defaults to assuming causation. The temporal sequence, intention followed by outcome, feels meaningful. The narrative writes itself. You wanted something. You focused on it. It happened. The causal arrow seems obvious. But temporal sequence doesn't establish causation. Events happen constantly, and some will inevitably follow your stated intentions by pure coincidence. The challenge is that coincidence doesn't feel like coincidence when you're primed to see patterns. It feels like evidence. This connects to a broader cognitive tendency called apophenia, the experience of perceiving meaningful patterns in random or meaningless data. Humans evolved in environments where detecting patterns was survival critical. Recognizing that rustling grass often preceded a predator, or that certain cloud formations predicted rain, provided adaptive advantages. The cost of missing a real pattern was often death. The cost of seeing a false pattern was minimal in comparison. So natural selection favored brains that err on the side of pattern detection. We see faces in clouds, hear voices in static, and find significance in random sequences. This bias doesn't turn off in modern contexts. It operates continuously, including when evaluating whether manifestation works. Agency detection is a related mechanism. This refers to the tendency to attribute events to intentional agents rather than impersonal forces. Children develop this bias early. Show a young child an ambiguous movement, and they'll often assume something alive caused it. Adults retain this tendency, though usually in subtler forms. When something good happens after manifesting, the brain seeks an agent to credit. You're an agent. The universe, in manifestation frameworks, is often conceptualized as an agent. Either way, agency gets assigned. The alternative, that the outcome resulted from an impersonal confluence of probabilities, feels less satisfying and requires more cognitive effort to accept. This need to assign agency connects to the just world hypothesis, the belief that the world is fundamentally fair and that people get what they deserve. This belief, though demonstrably false when examined objectively, provides psychological comfort. It suggests that outcomes are controllable through behavior and moral character. If you're a good person who thinks positively and works hard, good things will happen. If bad things happen, there must be a reason, some lesson or karmic debt. Manifestation fits seamlessly into a just world framework. It offers a mechanism by which deserving people, those who vibrate at the right frequency or maintain proper intentions, receive deserved rewards. This is comforting. It makes the world feel less chaotic and more navigable. But it also leads to problematic attributions. Success gets credited to positive thinking. Failure gets blamed on insufficient belief or misaligned energy. Neither attribution may be accurate. Locus of control, a concept developed by psychologist Julian Rotter, describes the degree to which people believe they have control over events in their lives. An internal locus of control means you believe outcomes are largely determined by your actions. An external locus means you attribute outcomes to luck, fate, or powerful others. Research generally shows that an internal locus of control correlates with better outcomes in many domains. People who believe they can influence results tend to try harder, persist longer, and take more responsibility for their development. But this correlation can be misleading. Sometimes an internal locus of control leads to overestimating influence and underestimating the role of chance, privilege, or systemic factors. Manifestation promotes an internal locus of control by teaching that thoughts and intentions shape reality. This can be empowering. It encourages proactivity and discourages helplessness. But it can also lead to excessive self-blame when things go wrong, and unwarranted self-credit when things go right. The gambler's fallacy and its inverse, the hot hand fallacy, both illustrate how poorly humans understand randomness. The gambler's fallacy is the belief that past random events influence future ones, like thinking a coin is due to land on heads after several tails. The hot hand fallacy is the belief that streaks in random sequences indicate momentum or skill, like thinking a basketball player who made several shots in a row is temporarily more likely to make the next one, beyond what their base skill level predicts. Both fallacies reflect the same underlying issue. The brain sees patterns in noise and constructs causal stories to explain those patterns. Manifestation outcomes are subject to the same misinterpretation. A string of successes after beginning a manifestation practice feels like momentum or proof of efficacy. A string of failures gets reinterpreted as a learning phase or insufficient commitment. Superstition operates through identical mechanisms. A baseball player wears the same socks during a winning streak. A student uses the same pen for every exam after scoring well once. These rituals provide a sense of control, and that sense of control reduces anxiety, which might indirectly improve performance. But the rituals themselves don't cause the outcomes. The outcomes result from skill, preparation, and probabilistic variation. Manifestation rituals function as structured superstitions. They create routines that feel meaningful and provide psychological benefits, like reduced anxiety and increased focus. These benefits can indirectly improve outcomes, but the mechanism is psychological and behavioral, not metaphysical. There's also a phenomenon called the illusion of causality, where people perceive causal relationships between events that co-occur frequently, even when the relationship is non-existent. If you manifest a goal and it happens, that's one co-occurrence. If you manifest several goals and several happen, the co-occurrences pile up. Your brain starts extracting a rule. Manifestation causes outcomes. But this ignores all the times you manifested things that didn't happen, and all the times things happened without manifesting. Properly assessing causality requires considering all 4 cells of a contingency table. Things that happened after manifesting, things that didn't happen after manifesting, things that happened without manifesting, things that didn't happen without manifesting. People reliably overweight the first cell and underweight or ignore the others. Control is also comforting in contexts of genuine uncertainty or helplessness. Health diagnoses economic instability, relationship challenges. These situations involve real unpredictability and limited control. Manifestation offers a way to feel agentic in circumstances that might otherwise feel overwhelming. The belief that you can influence outcomes through intention provides hope and reduces the psychological distress of powerlessness. This doesn't mean the belief is accurate, but it does mean the belief serves a function. Even if manifestation doesn't work through the mechanism claimed, believing it works can improve emotional well-being, which is valuable in itself. The trade-off is that the same belief can lead to self-blame during inevitable failures and can discourage seeking more effective solutions. The brain's preference for control narratives over chance narratives is strong enough that even explicit knowledge of randomness doesn't eliminate the illusion. Psychologists have demonstrated this in experiments where participants are told outcomes are random, but still behave as if they have influence. Intellectual understanding doesn't override the intuitive sense of agency. This is why explaining the psychology behind manifestation doesn't automatically make people stop believing in it. The feeling of control, the narrative of causality, and the sense that intentions matter persist even in the face of contradictory evidence. These aren't easily overridden by logic because they're rooted in fundamental aspects of how perception and cognition work. The illusion of control isn't entirely maladaptive. Feeling that you have some influence, even in uncertain situations, motivates action and reduces helplessness. The issue arises when the illusion leads to poor decision-making, misallocation of resources, or failure to recognize genuine constraints. Manifestation can do both. It can mobilize hope and effort. It can also delay necessary action or create unrealistic expectations. Understanding the mechanism helps navigate that tension more effectively. The placebo effect is one of the most well-documented phenomena in medical research, and it reveals something profound about the relationship between belief and outcome. When people believe a treatment will work, measurable physiological changes occur, even when the treatment contains no active ingredient. This isn't imagination or wishful thinking. It's a genuine biological response triggered by expectation. Manifestation practices operate through a nearly identical mechanism. The term placebo originally referred to inert substances given to patients in clinical trials to control for the psychological effects of receiving treatment. What researchers discovered, somewhat inconveniently, was that placebos weren't truly inert. They produced real effects. Pain decreased, symptoms improved, biochemical markers changed. In some conditions, particularly those involving subjective symptoms like pain, anxiety, or fatigue, placebo responses could be substantial, sometimes rivaling the effects of active medications. The key driver is expectation. When you expect a treatment to work, your brain begins preparing your body for the anticipated change. This involves multiple systems. The endogenous opioid system, which produces natural pain-relieving chemicals, activates in response to expectation of relief. Dopamine pathways, involved in reward and motivation, fire in anticipation of benefit. The autonomic nervous system, which regulates involuntary functions like heart rate and digestion, adjusts based on predicted needs. This isn't conscious. You don't decide to release endorphins or modulate dopamine. The expectation itself triggers the cascade. Your brain treats the belief in a coming change as information and adjusts physiology accordingly. Manifestation practices create powerful expectations. When you visualize success, affirm abundance, or declare intentions, you're telling your brain that positive change is imminent. The brain responds by shifting into states more compatible with that predicted future. Stress hormones may decrease. Confidence-related neurochemistry may increase. Energy allocation may shift toward approach behaviors rather than threat monitoring. These changes aren't metaphysical. They're standard physiological responses to anticipated conditions, but they're also real and consequential. Reduced stress improves decision-making. Increased confidence improves social interactions. Shifted energy allocation improves persistence. All of these make positive outcomes more likely, not through cosmic intervention, but through changed capacity and behavior. The conditioning model of placebo effects adds another layer. Classical conditioning, first demonstrated by Ivan Pavlov with dogs and bells, shows that neutral stimuli can come to elicit physiological responses after being repeatedly paired with active stimuli. If you take medication that relieves pain, and you always take it with a glass of water in a blue cup, eventually the blue cup itself might begin to trigger pain relief. Manifestation rituals function as conditioning cues. The vision board, the affirmation routine, the journal practice, these become associated with feelings of hope, focus, and possibility. Over time, engaging in the ritual itself begins to elicit the emotional and physiological states associated with pursuing goals successfully. You feel more capable because the ritual has been conditioned to produce that feeling. This conditioned response isn't fake. It's a genuine shift in state, mediated by learned associations. Athletes use similar techniques. Pre-performance routines help trigger optimal physical and mental states because the routine has been repeatedly paired with performance. The routine becomes a psychological switch. Expectancy theory in psychology describes how expectations about outcomes influence effort, strategy selection, and persistence. If you expect an action to lead to a desired outcome, you'll engage in that action more vigorously and persistently. If you expect failure, effort decreases. This creates self-fulfilling dynamics, where expectations shape behavior in ways that make the expected outcome more likely. When manifestation creates positive expectations, it increases the motivation to engage in goal-relevant behaviors. You try harder because you believe success is coming. You persist longer because you trust the process. You approach opportunities with less hesitation because you're confident in the eventual outcome. The expectation itself changes how you engage with the world, which changes what the world returns. There's also evidence that expectations alter perception directly. Studies on pain perception show that when people are told a stimulus will be painful, they rate identical stimuli as more painful than when told it will be mild. Visual perception studies show that expectations about what you're about to see influence what you actually perceive. The brain doesn't passively receive sensory data. It actively constructs experience based on predictions, and expectations are predictions. This means manifestation practices might literally change your perceptual experience of reality. If you expect opportunities to appear, you may perceive ambiguous situations as more opportunity-rich. If you expect social warmth, you may perceive neutral interactions as more positive. The world isn't changing. Your perceptual filters are adjusting based on expectations. Nocebo effects demonstrate the inverse. When people expect harm or negative outcomes, those expectations can produce real physiological symptoms. Tell someone a substance might cause nausea, and they're more likely to feel nauseous even if the substance is inert. Warn someone about side effects, and they're more likely to experience them. The expectation of negativity creates negative experience. This highlights why manifestation frameworks often emphasize maintaining positive expectations and avoiding negativity. It's not about cosmic vibrations. It's about managing the psychological and physiological effects of expectation. Dwelling on potential failure can create the stress, hesitation, and perceptual biases that make failure more likely. Focusing on potential success does the opposite. Ritual itself has psychological power independent of the specific content. Anthropological research shows that rituals reduce anxiety and increase feelings of control across cultures. The structure, repetition, and symbolic nature of ritual engage cognitive and emotional systems in ways that promote psychological stability. Manifestation practices are highly ritualized. The morning affirmations, the vision board creation, the gratitude journaling, these aren't random acts. They're formalized, repeated, imbued with meaning. This structure provides comfort and focus. It creates a sense that you're doing something purposeful, which reduces the anxiety of uncertainty. The reduction in anxiety is not trivial. Anxiety impairs cognitive function, decision-making, and social performance. It narrows attention and promotes avoidance behavior. Reducing anxiety through ritual improves functioning across multiple domains, making positive outcomes more achievable through entirely conventional means. There's also a social component. Many manifestation practices are shared in communities. You discuss intentions with friends, post about goals on social media, or join groups focused on collective manifestation. This social dimension creates accountability, encouragement, and modeling. You're more likely to persist with goals when others are watching and supporting. You're more likely to believe in a practice when you see others crediting it with success. The social validation strengthens the expectation. If people you respect believe manifestation works, that increases your confidence in it. Increased confidence strengthens the placebo effect. The community isn't just providing emotional support, it's amplifying the core mechanism by reinforcing belief. It's worth noting that placebo effects have limits. They work best for subjective symptoms influenced by psychological states. Pain, mood, anxiety, energy levels, these respond well. Objective diseases with clear biological markers respond less or not at all. You can't placebo your way out of a bacterial infection or shrink a tumor through positive thinking alone. Similarly, manifestation can influence outcomes where psychology and behavior play significant roles. Career advancement, relationship quality, personal projects, these domains involve decisions, interactions, and efforts that psychological states affect. But manifestation can't violate physical constraints or probability distributions. You can't manifest a lottery win, spontaneous wealth transfers, or outcomes that require changes in other people's autonomous choices. Understanding this boundary is important. Placebo effects are real but domain-specific. They optimize your internal state and behavior, which influences certain kinds of outcomes. They don't grant supernatural power over external reality. The mechanism by which expectation produces real change is fascinating, precisely because it's not mystical. It demonstrates how profoundly mind and body are integrated, how cognition shapes physiology, how belief influences capacity. Manifestation leverages this integration. It uses ritual, repetition, and emotional engagement to create powerful expectations. Those expectations trigger genuine neurobiological changes that alter behavior, perception, and performance. The feeling that manifestation works is real because the effects are real. The explanation just happens to be more interesting than magic. Your brain is responding to predicted futures by preparing you for those futures. When the prediction is positive, the preparation is too. That preparation increases your odds of success. The universe didn't change its mind about you. You changed your mind, and your biology followed. Expectations don't just change the person holding them. They change the behavior of others in ways that make the expectations come true. This dynamic, known as the self-fulfilling prophecy, operates quietly in social interactions every day. When applied to manifestation practices, explains why people who believe they're attracting success often genuinely experience more success. not because the universe responds to their thoughts, but because other people respond to their behavior. The concept was formalized by sociologist Robert Merton in 1948, though the phenomenon had been observed long before. A self-fulfilling prophecy occurs when a false belief about a situation causes people to act in ways that make the belief become true. The classic example involves a bank rumor. If people falsely believe a bank is failing, they rush to withdraw their money. The mass withdrawals cause the bank to fail. The belief, though initially false, creates its own reality. In interpersonal contexts, this operates through behavioral confirmation. When you expect someone to be friendly, hostile, competent, or unreliable, you subtly adjust your behavior toward them in ways that elicit the expected response. You're not consciously manipulating the adjustments, happen automatically through tone, body language, word choice, and attention patterns. The other person responds to your behavior, and their response confirms your expectation. This was demonstrated elegantly in studies by psychologist Mark Snyder and colleagues. In one experiment, men had phone conversations with women they believed to be either physically attractive or unattractive based on photographs, though the photos were randomly assigned and not actually of the women they were talking to. Men who believed they were speaking with attractive women behaved more warmly, engaged more enthusiastically, and expressed more interest. The women, responding to this warmth, behaved in warmer and more engaging ways themselves. Independent observers listening only to the women's side of the conversation rated those who had been randomly labeled attractive as actually sounding more attractive, friendly, and likable. The men's expectations changed the women's behavior in observable ways. This mechanism scales. When teachers expect certain students to be high performers, those students often improve more than equally capable peers who aren't expected to excel. This is the Pygmalion effect, named after the mythological sculptor who fell in love with his own statue. The expectation of growth creates behaviors that foster growth. Teachers give more attention, more challenging questions, more encouraging feedback, and more patience to students they believe are capable. Those students receiving this enriched interaction develop more. The effect isn't limited to education. Managers who expect employees to be productive create conditions that increase productivity. Leaders who expect team members to innovate encourage more risk-taking and provide more resources for experimentation. Even in brief interactions, expectations shape outcomes. People expected to be interesting receive more engaged conversation, making them actually more interesting in that context. Manifestation practices generate strong expectations about your own future success. When you visualize achieving a goal, affirm your worth, and declare your intentions, you're not just changing your internal state. You're changing how you present yourself socially. Confidence, even confidence based on metaphysical belief rather than objective assessment, alters body language. You make more eye contact. Your posture opens. Your voice carries more certainty. Your facial expressions relax. These nonverbal cues are processed rapidly and largely unconsciously by others. People respond to confident individuals differently than they respond to uncertain or anxious ones. They take confident people more seriously. They're more willing to collaborate, invest, or provide opportunities. Not because they consciously endorse manifestation, but because confidence signals competence, even when it doesn't. This creates a feedback loop. You manifest success, which increases your confidence. Increased confidence changes your social presentation. Changed social presentation elicits more positive responses from others. Those positive responses validate your belief in manifestation and further increase confidence. The cycle reinforces itself. The mechanism works even when your confidence is completely unfounded. Studies on overconfidence show that people who overestimate their abilities often achieve better social and professional outcomes than more accurate self-assessors, largely because their confidence influences how others treat them. They get more chances, more investment, and more forgiveness for errors. The world responds to the signal, not the underlying reality. Manifestation essentially manufactures confidence through a belief system. The practitioner believes they're working with cosmic forces that ensure success. This belief removes doubt, anxiety, and second-guessing. They approach situations with assurance. That assurance is socially contagious. Others begin to believe in the person's likelihood of success simply because the person so clearly believes it themselves. This dynamic is particularly powerful in domains where subjective evaluation matters. Job interviews, networking events, pitches to investors, artistic performances, romantic interactions. These all involve significant subjective judgment. How you're perceived depends heavily on the confidence and enthusiasm you project. Manifestation practices optimize both. There's also the phenomenon of behavioral mimicry. People unconsciously mirror the emotional states and behaviors of those they interact with. If you're calm and positive, others tend to become calmer and more positive in your presence. If you're anxious and defensive, others mirror that too. Manifestation practices typically promote positive emotional states, which means practitioners tend to induce positive states in others during interactions. Those others, feeling good in the interaction, form positive impressions and are more inclined to offer help or opportunities. Expectation effects also operate through opportunity creation. When you genuinely believe something is going to happen, you're more likely to mention it to others. You talk about your goals more openly because you're confident rather than self-protective. This social broadcasting increases the chances that someone in your network has relevant information or connections. You're not attracting opportunities through vibration. You're creating opportunities through communication enabled by confidence. People also respond to consistency and commitment signals. Manifestation practices often involve public or semi-public declarations of intent. You tell friends about your goals, post about them, or share your vision board. This signals seriousness. Others are more likely to invest in helping someone who seems genuinely committed than someone who seems ambivalent. The manifestation ritual functions as a costly signal of commitment, which elicits more support. There's a darker side to self-fulfilling prophecies that's worth acknowledging. Negative expectations also fulfill themselves. If you expect rejection, your behavior becomes more tentative and defensive, which others interpret as disinterest or hostility, leading to actual rejection. If you expect failure, you invest less effort, making failure more likely. The mechanism is symmetric. It amplifies both positive and negative expectations. This is why manifestation frameworks typically prohibit negative thinking or focusing on unwanted outcomes. It's not about cosmic law. It's about preventing negative self-fulfilling prophecies. Dwelling on failure creates the anxiety and behavioral patterns that increase failure probability. Focusing on success does the opposite. Attribution dynamics reinforce the cycle. When someone responds positively to you, you attribute it to your manifestation practice rather than to the changed behavior the practice produced. This strengthens your belief, which strengthens your confidence, which further improves social outcomes. The real mechanism remains invisible because the subjective experience is that you're just thinking differently, not that you're behaving differently. Interestingly, this means manifestation can work even for people who don't fully believe in it, as long as they go through the motions. The ritual itself can produce the confidence and behavioral changes that trigger social responses. But true believers often get stronger effects because their conviction produces more dramatic shifts in confidence and consistency. The social dimension also explains why manifestation seems to work better for some personality types. Extroverts, who have more social interactions, create more opportunities for self-fulfilling prophecies to operate. People with large networks have more chances for someone to respond to their confidence with opportunities. People in fields where subjective evaluation dominates see stronger effects than those in purely technical domains. It's also worth noting that not all positive outcomes from manifestation involve other people. Some are purely individual achievements. But even many apparently individual outcomes, career advancement, creative success, financial improvement, involve social components. Someone has to hire you, buy your work, or collaborate with you. Those decisions are influenced by how you present yourself, which is influenced by your confidence, which is influenced by your belief system. The self-fulfilling prophecy demonstrates something fundamental about social reality. It's not fully independent of perception. How people see you shapes how they treat you, which shapes what you can achieve. Manifestation practices optimize perception by generating genuine confidence. That confidence changes social dynamics in measurable, reproducible ways. The mechanism is entirely psychological and social, not cosmic. But the effects are real, often dramatic, and consistently misattributed to supernatural forces because the actual causal chain operates largely outside conscious awareness. The relationship between visualization and action is more complicated than it appears. Imagining a desired future can motivate behavior, but it can also paradoxically reduce motivation by providing premature psychological satisfaction. Understanding when and how mental imagery helps or hinders goal achievement reveals another layer of why manifestation practices feel effective and why they sometimes fail despite sincere effort. Temporal construal theory, developed by psychologists Nira Lieberman and Yakov Trope, examines how people think about events depending on their psychological distance. Events in the near future are construed concretely, focusing on specific actions and practical details. Events in the distant future are construed abstractly, focusing on meanings, values, and idealized outcomes. This shift in mental representation affects motivation and decision-making in predictable ways. When you visualize a long-term goal, you're typically engaging abstract construal. You imagine the emotional high of achievement, the symbolic meaning of success, the transformed version of yourself. These abstract representations feel inspiring. They connect to values and identity. They generate positive emotions. But they don't necessarily translate into immediate action because they lack the concrete specificity that drives behavior. Effective goal pursuit requires oscillating between abstract and concrete thinking. Abstract construal provides motivation and direction. Concrete construal provides actionable steps. Manifestation practices often emphasize the abstract, visualizing the outcome, feeling the success, embodying the desired state, without always pairing this with concrete planning about implementation. This imbalance can create a problem identified by researcher Gabriele Oettingen. She distinguishes between outcome fantasies and process simulations. Outcome fantasies involve imagining yourself having already achieved the goal, experiencing success in vivid detail. Process simulations involve imagining the specific steps and obstacles involved in reaching the goal. Research consistently shows that process simulation improves performance more than outcome fantasy. The reason appears to be that outcome fantasies provide premature reward. Your brain's reward circuitry responds to imagined success similarly to how it responds to actual success. Dopamine is released. You feel satisfied. The problem is that this satisfaction reduces the motivational tension that drives action. You've already experienced the emotional payoff mentally, which decreases the urgency to pursue it behaviorally. Some manifestation teachers inadvertently promote this dynamic by instructing practitioners to feel the emotion of success as intensely as possible, to live as if the goal has already been achieved. This feels powerful in the moment, but it can undermine the psychological drive needed for sustained effort. The visualization becomes a substitute for action rather than a complement to it. Mental contrasting offers a corrective approach. After vividly imagining the desired outcome, you deliberately consider the obstacles standing between you and that outcome. This creates psychological tension between present reality and desired future. That tension is motivating. It highlights the gap that needs closing. It triggers problem solving and planning. It converts abstract fantasy into concrete commitment. Oettingen formalized this into the WOOP method: wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. You identify the wish, imagine the best outcome, identify the key obstacle, and formulate a plan to overcome it. Studies show this technique increases goal attainment compared to positive thinking alone. The crucial element is the obstacle identification, which grounds the fantasy in reality and activates instrumental behavior. Many traditional manifestation practices omit the obstacle phase entirely. The philosophy often suggests that focusing on obstacles gives them energy or lowers your vibration. From a psychological standpoint, this is precisely backward. Ignoring obstacles doesn't make them disappear. It just ensures you won't prepare for them. Acknowledging obstacles while maintaining confidence in eventual success creates the optimal motivational state. Implementation intentions, discussed earlier, represent another form of concrete construal. When you specify exactly when and where you'll take a particular action, you're translating abstract goals into concrete behavioral triggers. This specificity dramatically increases follow-through, but it requires moving beyond visualization into practical planning. The distinction between outcome simulation and process simulation matters enormously. Athletes use visualization extensively, but effective athletic visualization focuses on process. A gymnast doesn't just imagine standing on the podium. She mentally rehearses each movement of her routine, feeling the muscle contractions, anticipating the balance adjustments, experiencing the sequence in real time. This process simulation strengthens the neural pathways involved in actual performance. Process simulation works because it's essentially a form of practice. The brain activates motor programs, timing circuits, and coordination systems similarly to how it would during physical execution. The mental rehearsal creates functional improvements in performance. Outcome simulation, imagining the medal ceremony, provides motivation but doesn't build skill. Manifestation practices lean heavily toward outcome simulation. You visualize having the relationship, the career, the money. You feel the emotions of success. This provides the motivational boost, but not the skill development or behavioral specificity needed to achieve complex goals. There's also the issue of goal substitution. When you repeatedly visualize success, the brain can begin treating the visualization itself as goal progress. The activity feels productive. It involves focused effort and emotional engagement. But it's not actually moving you toward the goal. It's a substitute activity that provides the feeling of progress without the reality. This is particularly problematic for goals that require sustained effort over long periods. The visualization provides regular hits of positive emotion, which can satisfy the psychological need that the goal was meant to address. You feel like you're becoming the person who has achieved the goal, so the urgency to actually achieve it decreases. Psychological distance also affects self-control. distant goals feel less real, which makes present sacrifices less justifiable. If success feels imminent and certain, as manifestation practices often suggest, you might paradoxically reduce effort. Why work hard when success is already on its way? This can create passive waiting rather than active striving. Conversely, when goals feel distant and uncertain, the need for consistent effort is clearer. You understand that success requires sustained work. This can be demotivating in its own way, but it at least prevents complacency. Manifestation's promise of easeful achievement can undermine the work ethic needed for difficult goals. Optimism itself is a double-edged variable. Moderate optimism improves performance by maintaining hope and effort. Excessive optimism, where success feels guaranteed, can reduce preparation and persistence. The optimal state appears to be confident uncertainty. You believe you can succeed, but you recognize that success requires continued effort and adaptation. Many manifestation frameworks promote confident certainty, which can backfire. There are also individual differences in how people respond to visualization. Some people find it highly motivating. Others find it draining or frustrating, particularly if the gap between current reality and desired future is large. For these individuals, focusing intensely on what they don't yet have creates dissatisfaction rather than motivation. They might benefit more from focusing on immediate next steps rather than distant outcomes. The timing of visualization matters too. Visualizing success before a performance or important event can boost confidence and reduce anxiety, which improves execution. Visualizing success far in advance of any specific opportunity can create the premature satisfaction problem. The same technique produces different effects depending on context. Some manifestation practitioners report experiencing resistance or self-sabotage after periods of intense visualization. They feel motivated initially, but then inexplicably avoid taking action or make choices that undermine their growth goals. This might reflect the psychological tension between the imagined future self and the present self. If the gap is too large, the imagined identity feels inauthentic, triggering resistance. The subconscious rejects the fantasy as unrealistic, leading to behavior that confirms the current identity rather than the aspirational one. Integration of abstract and concrete thinking appears to be key. Goals need both inspirational pull and practical steps. Visualization provides the pull. Planning provides the steps. Effective goal pursuit requires both, in appropriate balance. Many manifestation practices overemphasize the abstract and underemphasize the concrete, which explains both their occasional effectiveness and their frequent failures. When manifestation works, it's often because the practitioner is unconsciously doing concrete planning alongside the visualization. They're not just imagining success, they're also noticing opportunities, taking small actions, and adapting their approach based on feedback. The visualization provides sustained motivation, while the unconscious behavioral adjustments provide the actual mechanism. When manifestation fails, it's often because the practice remained purely abstract. The person visualized without planning, imagined without acting, and expected results without creating the conditions for results. Understanding this distinction doesn't require abandoning visualization. It requires pairing it with concrete implementation strategies. Imagine the outcome to maintain motivation and emotional connection to the goal. Then shift to imagining the process, identifying obstacles, and specifying actions. This balanced approach leverages the benefits of mental imagery while avoiding its pitfalls. The mechanism is entirely psychological, entirely within your control, and far more reliable than waiting for the universe to deliver what you visualized. Human beings need their beliefs to be consistent with their actions and self-concept. When inconsistencies arise, psychological discomfort follows, and the mind works to resolve that discomfort. This process, called cognitive dissonance, plays a central role in why people become increasingly convinced that manifestation works, even when objective evidence might suggest otherwise. Cognitive dissonance theory was introduced by psychologist Leon Festinger in 1957. The core principle is straightforward. When you hold two contradictory beliefs, or when your behavior conflicts with your beliefs, you experience psychological tension. This tension is uncomfortable enough that your mind automatically works to reduce it, usually by changing one of the conflicting elements. The classic demonstration involved participants performing an extremely boring task, turning pegs on a board for an hour. Afterward, they were asked to tell the next participant that the task was actually interesting and enjoyable. Some were paid $20 for this lie. Others were paid only $1. Later, when asked privately how interesting they actually found the task, those paid $1 rated it as significantly more interesting than those paid $20. The explanation reveals the mechanism. Participants paid $20 had external justification for lying. They lied for the money. No dissonance arose because their behavior aligned with clear incentive. Participants paid only $1 had insufficient external justification. They lied for essentially nothing, which created dissonance. To resolve this, their minds adjusted their internal beliefs. They convinced themselves the task actually was somewhat interesting. This eliminated the contradiction between their behavior and their self-concept as honest people. Manifestation practices create ideal conditions for cognitive dissonance. When you invest time and emotional energy into visualization, affirmations, and rituals, you're engaging in effortful behavior. This effort needs justification. The justification is that the practice works. But what happens when results aren't immediately apparent? Dissonance arises. You've been spending 30 minutes each morning on manifestation rituals. You've told friends about your practice. You've purchased journals, boards, and perhaps courses or coaching. If the practice doesn't work, all that effort was wasted. That realization is uncomfortable, particularly if the investment was substantial. The mind resolves this discomfort by finding evidence that the practice is working. Small positive events get magnified into proof. Coincidences become signs. Ordinary progress gets attributed to manifestation. This isn't dishonesty. It's automatic cognitive adjustment to maintain consistency and avoid the discomfort of having wasted time and energy. The more you invest in manifestation, the stronger the dissonance if it doesn't deliver. And the stronger the dissonance, the more motivated you are to find evidence of effectiveness. This creates a paradoxical situation where the people who invest most in manifestation are also the most biased in evaluating whether it works. Sunk cost fallacy operates through a similar mechanism. Once you've invested resources into something, you become irrationally committed to continuing, even when discontinuing would be wiser. You've already spent the money, time, or effort. Walking away means admitting that investment was wasted. Continuing feels like validating the investment, even if continuation only adds to the loss. People stay in failing relationships, careers, and projects longer than rational assessment would suggest, largely because of sunk costs. The same applies to belief systems. Once you've committed publicly to manifestation, defended it in conversations, and structured your life around it, abandoning the belief means admitting error. The psychological cost of that admission is high enough that finding ways to maintain the belief becomes preferable. This is amplified when manifestation is tied to identity. If you see yourself as someone who manifests, as someone aligned with cosmic forces, as an enlightened practitioner, the belief becomes part of who you are. Changing the belief requires changing your self-concept, which the mind resists strongly. It's easier to reinterpret evidence than to restructure identity. Motivated reasoning describes the tendency to process information in ways that support desired conclusions. When you want something to be true, you evaluate supporting evidence less critically and contradictory evidence more critically. You don't consciously choose to be biased. The bias operates automatically, below awareness, shaping how you interpret data. Manifestation practitioners want manifestation to work. They've invested in it emotionally, socially, and often financially. This desire biases their evaluation of outcomes. Successes are remembered vividly and given causal weight. Failures are minimized, explained away, or forgotten. The mental ledger becomes heavily skewed toward evidence of effectiveness. There's also effort justification. The principle here is that the more effort something requires, the more valuable we judge it to be, even if the value is objectively unrelated to effort. Groups that require difficult initiation rituals are rated as more attractive by members who underwent those rituals than by those who didn't. The suffering justifies itself by inflating the perceived value of what was gained. Manifestation rituals require discipline. Early morning affirmations, maintaining positive thoughts, avoiding negativity, these demand effort. That effort needs justification. The justification is that membership in the manifestation framework, the identity as someone who manifests, is valuable. This perceived value reinforces commitment, which further increases effort, which further increases the need for justification. The loop is self-sustaining. Choice-supportive bias is another relevant phenomenon. After making a decision, people tend to retroactively attribute positive features to the option they chose, and negative features to the options they rejected, even if they initially saw things differently. Once you've chosen to believe in manifestation, your mind begins highlighting its benefits and downplaying its costs or contradictions. You start noticing all the testimonials and success stories. You remember the times synchronicities occurred. You feel grateful for the community and the hope the practice provides. The aspects that initially made you skeptical, the lack of mechanism, the unfalsifiable claims, the failures, fade in salience. Your choice gets supported by selective memory and attention. Backfire effects can occur when manifestation is challenged. If someone presents evidence that manifestation doesn't work beyond placebo and cognitive biases, the committed practitioner may become more convinced rather than less. The challenge creates dissonance. The mind resolves it by generating counter-arguments, seeking supportive information, and reinforcing the original belief. The threat to the belief strengthens rather than weakens it. This is particularly common when the belief is tied to social identity. If your friends and community share the belief, accepting that it's false means social isolation or conflict. The cost of changing the belief exceeds the cost of maintaining it, even in the face of contrary evidence. You rationalize, reinterpret, and remain committed because the alternative is too disruptive. Rationalization is the process by which the mind generates plausible-sounding reasons to justify beliefs or behaviors that were actually adopted for other reasons. You started manifesting because it felt hopeful and the community was supportive. But you can't say that's why you continue, so your mind generates better reasons. It works. You've seen evidence. The philosophy makes sense. These rationalizations feel genuine because the mind believes them even as it constructs them. This doesn't mean everyone who believes in manifestation is self-deceiving. Many people genuinely have positive experiences. The point is that cognitive dissonance creates pressure to interpret those experiences as validating the practice, even when alternative explanations exist. The mechanism operates whether or not the belief is accurate. The psychology of belief perseverance shows that once beliefs are established, they become resistant to change even if the original evidence supporting them is completely discredited. Tell people a fabricated story that leads them to form a belief, then reveal the story was false, and the belief often persists. The initial evidence sparked a network of supporting thoughts and interpretations. Those remain even after the foundation is removed. Manifestation. Beliefs often form based on initial striking coincidences or successes. Maybe something happened shortly after starting the practice that felt miraculous. That event anchors the belief. Later, even if such events don't recur, the belief persists because the interpretive framework has been established. New information gets filtered through that framework rather than challenging it. There's comfort in this consistency. Changing beliefs is cognitively and emotionally costly. It requires reevaluating past decisions, possibly admitting mistakes, and tolerating uncertainty. Maintaining beliefs, even questionable ones, provides stability. This stability is valuable, which is why the mind defends beliefs so vigorously. Understanding cognitive dissonance doesn't necessarily mean you should abandon manifestation if it's serving you well. But it does mean you should recognize that your confidence in the practice might be influenced by the psychological need to justify effort, rather than by objective effectiveness. The feeling of certainty isn't always correlated with truth. Sometimes it's just the mind protecting itself from discomfort. The mechanism here is entirely psychological. There's no cosmic force making manifestation work. But there is a powerful internal force making you believe it works, regardless of whether it does. That force is the need for cognitive consistency. Your mind will work tirelessly to ensure that your beliefs, actions, and self-concept align. When they don't, beliefs shift to restore harmony. This creates the subjective certainty that manifestation is effective, even when the actual causal chain runs through entirely mundane channels like confirmation bias, behavioral change, and motivated reasoning. Expectations shape reality not just through the person holding them, but through how those expectations are communicated and responded to by others. This dynamic becomes particularly powerful in structured social settings, where roles and relationships create predictable patterns of interaction. When someone believes their manifestation practice is working, they don't just change their own behavior. They change how others see them and respond to them, creating outcomes that validate the original belief. The Pygmalion effect, named after studies by psychologist Robert Rosenthal beginning in the 1960s, demonstrates this with particular clarity. In the original experiment, teachers were told that certain students had been identified through testing as intellectual bloomers who would show unusual academic gains during the year. In reality, these students were selected randomly. Yet by the end of the year, the randomly designated bloomers showed significantly greater gains in IQ scores than their classmates. The teacher's expectations, though based on false information, changed how they interacted with those students. They gave them more time to answer questions, offered more detailed feedback, provided more challenging material, and communicated warmer nonverbal signals. The students, receiving this enriched interaction, actually did bloom. The prophecy fulfilled itself through changed behavior on both sides of the relationship. This same mechanism operates whenever someone begins manifesting with genuine conviction. Their belief that success is coming changes how they interact with everyone around them. They communicate differently with potential employers, collaborators, romantic interests, and even casual acquaintances. The changed communication elicits changed responses. Those responses create opportunities and outcomes that confirm the original belief. The key is that both parties in the interaction are affected. The person manifesting behaves with more confidence, openness, and positivity. The person responding perceives these qualities and reacts favorably. Neither party needs to believe in manifestation for the mechanism to work. The believer simply needs to behave differently, and the responder simply needs to react naturally to that different behavior. Behavioral confirmation is the technical term for how expectations guide interactions toward confirming those expectations. When you expect someone to be friendly, you approach them warmly. They respond to your warmth with warmth. You interpret their warm response as evidence they're friendly, confirming your expectation. But your expectation created the outcome by shaping your initial behavior. This operates continuously in social life. We constantly form expectations about others based on appearance, reputation, context, and stereotypes. Those expectations guide our behavior. Our behavior influences their behavior. Their behavior confirms our expectations. The cycle is so seamless that we rarely notice we're partly creating what we're observing. Manifestation practices create particularly strong expectations about your own future. You expect to succeed, to attract opportunities, to be valued. These expectations change your demeanor. You walk into a job interview genuinely believing you're meant for this role. That belief manifests as calm confidence. The interviewer responds to your confidence by perceiving competence. Your perceived competence increases the likelihood of an offer. The manifestation belief created behavioral changes that created real outcomes. The beauty of this mechanism is that it works even if the confidence is entirely unfounded. Objective qualifications matter less than many people assume in contexts involving subjective evaluation. How you present yourself, the energy you project, the certainty you convey, these influence decisions powerfully. Manifestation generates genuine certainty through metaphysical belief, which produces the social signals that influence others favorably. Expectancy effects extend beyond one-on-one interactions. They operate in group dynamics and organizational contexts. When a leader genuinely believes their team will succeed, that belief changes how they allocate resources, communicate challenges, and respond to setbacks. The team perceives the leader's confidence, which increases their own confidence and effort. Performance improves, validating the leader's initial belief. Someone manifesting professional success often unconsciously adopts leadership presence. They believe they're rising, so they begin behaving as someone who is rising would behave. They speak up more in meetings. They propose bold ideas. They network with more senior colleagues. These behaviors create visibility and opportunity. Others begin to see them as someone on an upward trajectory. That perception becomes reality through increased investment and opportunity from others. There's also the phenomenon of stereotype threat and stereotype lift. Stereotype threat occurs when negative stereotypes about a group impair performance by members of that group through anxiety and reduced expectations. Stereotype lift occurs when positive stereotypes or positive individual expectations enhance performance. Manifestation creates a personal stereotype lift. You've stereotyped yourself as someone who succeeds, someone aligned with cosmic support. This internal stereotype improves performance by reducing anxiety and increasing confidence. The reduction in anxiety specifically is critical. Anxiety impairs almost every form of performance. It narrows attention, increases self-monitoring, disrupts working memory, and promotes risk aversion. Confidence does the opposite. It widens attention, reduces self-consciousness, frees cognitive resources, and enables appropriate risk-taking. Manifestation, by generating confidence through metaphysical belief, removes performance barriers that would otherwise limit outcomes. Social proof adds another layer. When you manifest openly, discussing your goals and beliefs with others, you're not just declaring intentions. You're recruiting others into your expectation framework. Friends and family begin to see you as someone pursuing this goal. They adjust their behavior accordingly. They mention relevant opportunities. They offer encouragement. They hold you accountable. Their involvement increases the probability of success, not through magic, but through social support mobilized by your public commitment. This recruitment is often unintentional. You're not explicitly asking for help, but by speaking confidently about your goals, you're implicitly inviting others to participate in your success. People generally like to support confident, optimistic individuals who seem to know where they're going. Manifestation creates that impression, which activates supportive responses from your network. There's a reciprocal dynamic as well. When people invest in supporting your goals, they become invested in your success. They want to see their advice taken, their introductions bear fruit, their encouragement validated. This creates additional motivation for them to continue helping. Your manifestation belief initiated a social dynamic that becomes self-sustaining through others' investment. The halo effect contributes too. When someone perceives you as confident and purposeful, they tend to attribute other positive qualities to you as well. Confidence in one domain creates perceived competence in others. You might be manifesting career success, but the confidence you project makes you seem more intelligent, more reliable, and more likable generally. These perceived qualities improve outcomes across multiple life domains, not just the one you're focused on. Mirroring and emotional contagion mean that your emotional state influences those around you. If you're genuinely excited and optimistic because you believe manifestation is working, people in your presence tend to feel more positive themselves. They associate you with positive feelings, which makes them want to spend more time with you and help you more. Your belief in manifestation creates an emotional atmosphere that draws support and opportunity. There's also assortative interaction. People tend to gravitate toward others who share their worldview and emotional tone. When you're manifesting, you likely spend more time with other optimistic, goal-oriented people. This concentrates your social network toward individuals more likely to offer opportunities and support. Your social environment shifts to become more conducive to success, not because the universe rearranged it, but because your behavior and beliefs led you to select different interactions. The self-fulfilling prophecy operates at the societal level too. Cultural beliefs about success, worthiness, and possibility shape what people attempt and what they achieve. Manifestation is a cultural script that tells people they deserve success and can achieve it. This script, whether metaphysically true or not, empowers people to pursue goals they might otherwise consider beyond reach. The pursuing itself, done with confidence and persistence, creates outcomes that validate the script. It's worth recognizing that self-fulfilling prophecies can also work negatively. If you expect rejection, failure, or unworthiness, your behavior changes in ways that elicit those outcomes. You approach opportunities defensively. Others perceive your hesitation and respond with less enthusiasm. Their muted response confirms your negative expectation. The cycle spirals downward just as easily as it spirals upward. Manifestation frameworks typically prohibit negative expectations explicitly, not because negativity angers the universe, but because negative self-fulfilling prophecies undermine outcomes. The insistence on positive thinking is actually sound psychological advice, even if the metaphysical justification is questionable. Positive expectations create positive behavioral loops. Negative expectations create negative ones. The mechanism is social psychology, not cosmic law, but the practical advice remains useful. Understanding that expectations shape outcomes through interpersonal dynamics doesn't diminish the value of manifestation practices. It clarifies how they work. You're not bending reality through thought alone. You're changing how you present yourself, which changes how others respond, which changes what becomes possible. The mechanism is powerful, reproducible, and entirely grounded in well-established psychological principles. The universe isn't listening to your thoughts, but the people around you are reading your behavior, and they're responding in ways that make your confident expectations come true. Rituals calm the mind. Structure reduces anxiety. Repetition creates psychological stability. These effects are measurable, consistent across cultures, and explain a significant portion of why manifestation practices feel effective. The content of the ritual matters less than the fact that ritual is happening at all. The human mind responds to formalized, repeated actions in ways that improve functioning, which improves outcomes. Anthropological research shows that ritual behavior is universal. Every known culture develops rituals around important life transitions, uncertain outcomes, and anxiety-provoking situations. Weddings, funerals, hunts, harvests, competitions all become occasions for formalized behavior. This universality suggests ritual serves adaptive psychological functions rather than being arbitrary cultural decoration. One primary function is anxiety reduction. Uncertainty is psychologically uncomfortable. The mind craves predictability and control. When neither is available through direct action, ritual provides a substitute. It creates a sense of order and agency in contexts where actual control is limited. This sense of control, even if illusory, reduces stress and improves cognitive function. Studies on ritual and anxiety have demonstrated this repeatedly. Athletes performing pre-competition rituals show reduced cortisol levels and improved performance compared to those who don't. Students performing good luck rituals before exams report less anxiety and sometimes perform better. The rituals don't change external circumstances, but they change internal states in ways that affect outcomes. Manifestation practices are highly ritualized. Morning affirmations at a specific time, vision boards updated regularly, gratitude journals with consistent formatting. These create structure and predictability. Engaging in the ritual signals to your mind that you're taking meaningful action toward your goals. This reduces the helpless feeling that often accompanies long-term ambitions where progress is slow or uncertain. The reduction in anxiety has cascading effects. Anxiety narrows attention toward threats and away from opportunities. It promotes risk aversion and defensive behavior. It impairs decision-making by overwhelming working memory with worry. Reducing anxiety through ritual frees cognitive resources for more productive use. You notice more opportunities because your attention isn't consumed by threat monitoring. You take more risks because fear is managed. You make better decisions because worry isn't clouding judgment. Rituals also provide what psychologists call temporal landmarks. These are points in time that feel like new beginnings, allowing people to mentally separate their past self from their current self. New Year's Day is a cultural, temporal landmark, which is why resolutions cluster there. The feeling of a fresh start increases motivation and effort. Manifestation rituals create personal, temporal landmarks. Each time you perform the ritual, you're reinforcing the idea that this is a new phase, a period of growth, a time when things are changing. This mental framing increases willingness to try new behaviors and persist through difficulties. You're not stuck in old patterns. You're in a transformative period. The ritual marks and sustains that perception. The consistency required by ritual also builds self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is your belief in your ability to execute actions required to achieve goals. It's distinct from confidence. Confidence is belief in outcomes. Self-efficacy is belief in your capacity to do what's needed. Performing a daily manifestation ritual demonstrates to yourself that you can maintain discipline and commitment. This demonstration increases your belief in your ability to follow through on other goal-related actions. This effect is particularly strong when the ritual is difficult or requires sacrifice. Waking early for affirmations, maintaining gratitude journals during stressful periods, these are mild challenges that build self-trust. You prove to yourself that you keep commitments even when inconvenient. This self-trust generalizes. You become more likely to trust yourself to complete other difficult tasks. Rituals also create what anthropologists call liminality, a transitional state between ordinary life and something set apart. When you enter ritual space, whether literally through physical environment or psychologically through focused attention, you step outside normal concerns. This creates a mental break that can be restorative and clarifying. You gain perspective unavailable while immersed in daily demands. Manifestation rituals provide structured time to reflect on goals and values. In an otherwise reactive life, spent responding to emails, obligations, and immediate demands, the ritual creates space for intentional thinking. This space allows for course correction, priority clarification, and emotional processing. The benefits come not from cosmic connection, but from deliberate psychological pause. Repetition, specifically, has neurological effects. The brain strengthens neural pathways that are used repeatedly. When you repeatedly visualize success, affirm goals, or practice gratitude, you're strengthening the neural networks associated with those concepts and emotions. Over time, those states become more accessible and sustainable. Optimism and focus become easier because the mental pathways supporting them have been reinforced through practice. This is the same mechanism behind meditation benefits. Repeated practice of bringing attention to the present moment strengthens attentional control networks in the brain. Repeated practice of manifestation rituals strengthens goal-focused and positive emotional networks. The mechanism isn't mystical. It's neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize based on experience. The social dimension of shared rituals adds additional power. When manifestation is practiced in groups or discussed in communities, the ritual becomes socially validated. This validation strengthens commitment and provides accountability. You're more likely to maintain a practice that others recognize and value. The community reinforces the ritual, which reinforces participation, which reinforces the community. The loop sustains itself. Group rituals also synchronize participants physiologically and emotionally. Research on collective ritual shows that synchronized movement and chanting create feelings of unity and shared purpose. These feelings reduce individual anxiety and increase cooperative behavior. Even online manifestation communities, where physical synchronization is limited, create emotional synchronization through shared language, goals, and practices. There's also a phenomenon called effort heuristic. People judge the value of something partly by how much effort it required. Rituals that demand time, consistency, and dedication feel more valuable than quick or easy practices. This perception of value reinforces commitment. You've invested significantly, so the practice must be worthwhile. This logic is technically a fallacy, but it functions to sustain engagement with practices that might otherwise be abandoned during difficult periods. The placebo literature shows that more elaborate rituals produce stronger placebo effects. Pills that look expensive work better than cheap-looking ones. Injections work better than pills even when both are inert. Surgical interventions produce stronger placebo effects than less invasive procedures. The investment of time, money, and effort associated with the intervention amplifies expectation, which amplifies physiological response. Manifestation rituals, when taken seriously, require substantial investment. This investment amplifies the expectancy effects discussed earlier. You're not just thinking positive thoughts. You're waking at dawn, maintaining journals, creating elaborate vision boards, participating in group ceremonies. The effort itself strengthens your belief that outcomes will follow, which triggers the psychological and social mechanisms that actually produce those outcomes. Routine more generally improves mental health and functioning. Depression and anxiety both correlate with disrupted routines. Stable daily structures support mood regulation, sleep quality, and stress management. Manifestation practices impose routine. The daily affirmations, the weekly vision board updates, the consistent journaling, these create temporal structure. That structure has mental health benefits independent of any goal achievement. The sense of control mentioned earlier deserves emphasis. Humans need to feel they have some agency in their lives. Contexts that deny agency, imprisonment, poverty, oppressive relationships, produce psychological deterioration. Even small acts of autonomous choice improve well-being. Manifestation rituals provide regular experiences of autonomous action. You choose your goals. You choose your practices. You exercise will in structured ways. This satisfies the fundamental need for agency. The ritual framework also provides a lens for interpreting random variation in outcomes. Life naturally includes both good and bad events, often in clusters due to statistical clustering of random events. Manifestation rituals give you something to credit when good clusters occur and something to adjust when bad clusters occur. This attribution maintains a sense of active engagement rather than passive victimhood. It's worth noting that ritual can become problematic when it's rigidly maintained despite conflicting with well-being, or when it becomes a substitute for necessary concrete action. If someone spends hours daily on manifestation rituals while avoiding job applications, the ritual is dysfunctional. But when ritual complements rather than replaces practical effort, it provides genuine psychological benefits. Understanding the mechanism doesn't require abandoning the practice. Manifestation rituals reduce anxiety, build discipline, create structure, and strengthen goal-relevant neural pathways. These are real benefits grounded in psychology and neuroscience. The practice works, not because it manipulates cosmic energy, but because it systematically creates psychological conditions that support goal achievement. The mechanism is mundane, but the effects can be profound. The ritual changes you, and changing yourself changes what becomes possible. Success and failure both require explanation. The human mind doesn't passively observe outcomes. It constructs narratives about why things happened, assigning causes and drawing lessons. These explanatory narratives are subject to systematic biases that distort understanding of what actually drove results. When it comes to manifestation, these biases operate with particular force, creating the persistent illusion that the practice works even when outcomes reflect ordinary luck and effort. Attribution theory, developed by psychologists including Fritz Heider, Harold Kelly, and Bernard Weiner, examines how people explain events. A central finding is the fundamental attribution error, the tendency to overemphasize dispositional factors and underemphasize situational factors when explaining others' behavior. When someone else fails, we attribute it to their character or ability. When someone else succeeds, we underweight the role of luck or circumstances. Interestingly, this bias often reverses for self-attributions. The self-serving bias describes the tendency to attribute your own successes to internal factors like skill or effort, while attributing failures to external factors like bad luck or unfair circumstances. You succeed because you're talented and worked hard. You fail because the situation was impossible or someone else interfered. This asymmetry serves ego protection. Taking credit for success maintains self-esteem. Externalizing failure protects against feelings of inadequacy. The bias operates automatically, shaping how you remember and discuss outcomes without conscious awareness that you're being selective. Manifestation practices interact with self-serving bias in predictable ways. When something good happens after manifesting, the practice gets internal credit. Your thoughts, your vibration, your alignment created the outcome. When something bad happens or a goal isn't achieved, external explanations emerge. The timing wasn't right. You had limiting beliefs you weren't aware of. Mercury was in retrograde. The universe has a better plan. This flexible attribution system makes manifestation essentially unfalsifiable. Every outcome can be interpreted as either confirmation of the practice or as needing refinement of the practice, but never as disconfirmation. The framework accommodates all evidence without being threatened by contradictions. Hindsight bias compounds the problem. This is the tendency, after an outcome is known, to see that outcome as having been predictable or even inevitable. Once something has happened, you reconstruct your memory of the situation to make the outcome seem more obvious than it actually was before it occurred. If you manifested a new job and got one, hindsight bias makes you remember the success as expected and predictable. You forget the doubts you had, the moments when it felt unlikely, the alternative explanations you considered. The memory smooths into a clean narrative. You manifested, and it worked, just as you knew it would. This reconstructive memory process happens every time you recall an event. Memories aren't stable recordings. They're rebuilt each time from fragments, and the rebuilding is influenced by current beliefs and knowledge. Your belief that manifestation works reshapes your memories to align with that belief. Past uncertainty becomes past confidence. Past luck becomes past mastery. Outcome bias is the tendency to judge decisions based on their outcomes rather than on the quality of the decision-making process at the time. A good decision that leads to a bad outcome gets judged as a bad decision. A poor decision that leads to a good outcome gets judged as wise. This conflates luck with skill. When manifestation precedes a positive outcome, the outcome validates the decision to manifest, even if the outcome was largely determined by factors unrelated to manifestation. You can't rerun history to see what would have happened without manifesting. You only see the one timeline where you manifested and something good happened. Outcome bias makes you conclude manifestation caused the result. The availability heuristic influences which outcomes you remember and weigh most heavily. Vivid, emotionally charged, and recent events are more available in memory than mundane, neutral, or distant ones. Manifestation successes, especially surprising or dramatic ones, are vivid and emotional. They get encoded strongly and retrieved easily. Small failures, non-events, and gradual progress through conventional means are less memorable. This creates distorted mental accounting. When mentally tallying whether manifestation works, you're drawing from biased samples. The memorable confirmations dominate. The forgettable disconfirmations barely register. The tally inevitably skews toward validation, not because the true ratio favors manifestation, but because memory and retrieval are biased. Illusory correlation is the perception of a relationship between variables when no relationship exists, or when the relationship is weaker than perceived. If you notice several instances of manifesting followed by success, your mind forms a correlation, even if the base rate of success was identical with or without manifestation. Properly assessing correlation requires comparing success rates in 4 conditions. success after manifesting, failure after manifesting, success without manifesting, and failure without manifesting. People naturally focus on the first quadrant and neglect the others. This leads to perceiving correlations that are actually absent. Social comparison and social validation also shape attribution. If your friends who manifest also report success, you interpret their outcomes as evidence that manifestation works. You're less likely to hear about their failures because people selectively share successes. This creates an informational environment where confirmatory evidence is abundant and disconfirmatory evidence is hidden. Success stories circulate widely. They're inspiring, shareable, and align with what people want to believe. Failures are private, attributed to personal inadequacy, or dismissed as not following the method correctly. The public narrative around manifestation is therefore heavily filtered toward success, which shapes your expectations and attributions when evaluating your own results. The narrative fallacy describes how humans construct coherent stories to explain outcomes, even when those outcomes resulted from random processes. We're uncomfortable with randomness and chaos. Stories provide meaning and structure. So when something happens, we weave a narrative linking prior events to the outcome, emphasizing factors that fit the story and omitting factors that don't. Manifestation provides a ready-made narrative structure. Intention precedes outcome, suggesting causation. The story writes itself. You wanted something, focused on it, and it appeared. The narrative is simple, emotionally satisfying, and confirms your agency. Alternative narratives, involving probabilities, timing, and mundane effort, are less satisfying and require more cognitive work. Once a narrative is established, contradictory information is either ignored or assimilated into the narrative rather than challenging it. If something you manifested doesn't happen, the narrative adjusts. Maybe you didn't believe hard enough. Maybe the universe knows better. Maybe it's coming later. The core narrative, that manifestation works, remains intact. Actor-observer asymmetry means you attribute your own behavior to situational factors while attributing others' behavior to their dispositions. But for manifestation, this can reverse. You might see your own success as internally caused by your thoughts, while seeing others' success as situationally caused or lucky. This maintains your belief in manifestation as a unique or special practice that works specifically for you. Confirmation bias, discussed earlier, also affects attribution. You interpret ambiguous outcomes in ways that support your belief that manifestation works. A delayed success is evidence that manifestation required patience. An immediate success is evidence that your alignment was strong. A non-success is evidence that you need to refine your practice. Every outcome feeds the belief. Counterfactual thinking, imagining alternative versions of events, is typically biased toward supporting current beliefs. When you think about what would have happened if you hadn't manifested, you imagine worse outcomes. You don't consider that things might have gone the same or better. This biased counterfactual reinforces the belief that manifestation made a difference. There's also a temporal ordering bias. Events that occur in sequence feel causally connected, even when they're independent. You manifest on Monday, something good happens on Friday. The temporal sequence creates the intuition of causation. But countless events happen during that week, and many factors influence the Friday outcome. The Monday manifestation is just one event in the sequence, probably not the most causally relevant one. The just world hypothesis mentioned earlier also affects attribution. You believe you deserve success because you're doing the spiritual or psychological work of manifesting. When success arrives, it confirms the just world belief. You got what you deserve through proper effort. This attribution feels morally satisfying, which reinforces both the manifestation practice and the belief in cosmic fairness. Understanding these attribution biases doesn't require cynicism about your achievements. Real effort and skill contribute to success. But accurately understanding which factors mattered requires recognizing that your mind systematically misattributes credit. Manifestation gets overweighted. Luck and situational factors get underweighted. Conventional effort that occurred alongside manifestation gets attributed to manifestation, rather than being recognized as the primary mechanism. The feeling that manifestation works is real because the biased attributions are real. Your mind genuinely believes the narrative it's constructed, but the narrative is shaped by cognitive biases that operate universally, not by accurate causal analysis. Success has many parents. Failure is an orphan. Manifestation claims parentage of every success and disowns every failure. The attributional pattern is predictable, systematic, and entirely explicable through well-established psychological principles. The mechanism isn't cosmic law. It's the human mind doing what it evolved to do, constructing meaning from experience even when that meaning doesn't reflect objective causality.